It was supposed to be an uneventful night. Cody had asked me to house sit while he was out of town, and since I had nothing better going on, I figured it was easy enough. The only responsibility I had was to look after Theo, Cody's overly energetic Pomsky, who had a habit of barking at everything that moved. It didn't seem like a big deal, though. I planned on spending most of the night on the couch, playing games and keeping Theo entertained when needed. Cody's house was quiet almost too quiet, considering how isolated the property was. His place sat at the end of a long, winding driveway surrounded by woods, with the nearest neighbors being miles away. The kind of place that felt peaceful during the day, but downright eerie at night. I wasn't one to spook easily, but something about the house gave me chills. Still, I figured it was just the unfamiliarity. I didn't spend much time there, and isolation could mess with anyone's head. The evening started off normally enough. Theo was bouncing around, barking at the wind, and I was zoning out in front of the TV. It was one of those nights where time seemed to blur, and before I knew it, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the house cloaked in darkness. That's when Theo's barking started to change. It wasn't his usual "I hear a squirrel" bark. This was different. His barking was more frantic, and he was pacing back and forth between the living room and the back door, his little paws skittering on the hardwood floor. It got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I groaned, put down the controller, and called out to him, "Theo, chill." "What is it?" Of course, he didn't stop. If anything, he started barking louder, and now he was standing by the back door, scratching at it like he desperately wanted to get outside. I sighed, figuring he just needed to use the bathroom, and made my way over to let him out. But as I reached for the doorknob, something made me pause. There, just beyond the screen door, was the shadowy outline of a man. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was dark and the outdoor lights weren't on, so all I could make out was a vague shape standing in the yard. But when I moved closer, my heart skipped a beat. The figure wasn't just standing there. He was moving, slowly reaching for the handle of the back door. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming at me to back away. But instead, I took a deep breath and, in the steadiest voice I could manage, called out, "Who are you?" "What do you want?" The man didn't seem startled by my voice. In fact, he didn't seem to care at all. He just stood there, his face hidden in the shadows, and after a long pause, he finally answered, "Have you seen Melissa?" The way he asked the question sent a shiver down my spine. His voice was rough, almost guttural, and he said it in a way that made it clear he wasn't asking for directions or help. There was something off about him, something that immediately put me on edge. "Melissa doesn't live here," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You've got the wrong house. You need to leave." For a moment, I thought he was going to ignore me. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the man nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully, and stepped back into the shadows. I stood there, staring at the spot where he had been, my mind racing. Who was that? And why did he know Melissa's name? I locked the back door and went back to the living room, my heart still pounding. Theo had finally stopped barking, but he was pacing nervously, his ears perked up as if he could sense something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and texted Cody, asking him if he knew anyone who might be looking for his sister. When he replied a few minutes later, it only made things worse. "Cody, no idea. She doesn't hang around with anyone like that." Was he still there? I didn't reply. Instead, I spent the next hour glued to the window, watching the backyard for any signs of movement. But the man never came back, or at least, I didn't see him again. The next day, I was feeling a little less freaked out. Maybe it had been a misunderstanding. Maybe the guy was just lost, and the fact that he knew Melissa's name was some strange coincidence. I tried to convince myself that it was over and that I had nothing to worry about. Cody would be back in a few days and everything would go back to normal. But as the sun began to set again, the uneasiness returned. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was out there just waiting for me to let my guard down. And that night, I found out just how right I was. It was late, probably around midnight, when I heard the doorbell ring. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. Who the hell rings a doorbell at midnight? I sat up, listening closely, hoping I'd imagined it. But there it was again, a long, insistent ring, followed by several short ones in rapid succession. Theo started barking like crazy, and I quickly grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a fire poker from the living room. I crept towards the front door, peeking through the window to see who was outside. My blood ran cold when I saw him ... It was the same man from the night before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, just barely visible in the dim light of the porch, was another figure. This one was larger, hulking in the shadows, and he wasn't holding still like the first man had. He was shifting his weight back and forth, as if impatient. I swallowed hard and kept the door locked, praying they would leave. Then, the man who had asked for Melissa spoke again. "Kate," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I know you're in there." The sound of my name sent a wave of panic crashing over me. How did he know my name? I hadn't told him. I hadn't said anything other than to tell him to leave. How the hell did he know who I was? I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling as I whispered to the operator, telling them what was happening. But before I could finish, there was a loud crash at the back door. They were trying to break in through the back. I ran to the kitchen, heart pounding in my chest, and saw the door handle rattling violently. Theo was barking like crazy, scratching at the floor as if he wanted to attack whoever was on the other side. But I couldn't wait. I had to get out. I had to get help. Without thinking, I bolted for the garage, locking the door behind me as I fumbled with the keys to Cody's car. I could hear them inside now, their footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor as they searched for me. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the keys, but finally, I got the car started. I threw it into reverse, backing out of the driveway as fast as I could. And in the rearview mirror, I saw them, both men, standing in the doorway, watching me drive away. I didn't stop until I reached the police station. When the officers finally arrived at Cody's house, the men were gone. They had torn the place apart, but nothing was missing. No valuables, no electronics, just broken doors and shattered windows. But there was one thing they left behind, a note scrawled on the wall in what looked like black marker. It read, "You can't run forever, Kate. I moved out of Cody's place the next day. And I've never been back.